My name is Clara Bennett. I'm 34 years old, and I'm writing this 1 week after my life split cleanly in half. There was the before, and there was the after. The before was built out of anxious hope, hospital disinfectant, and the exhausting discipline of loving someone through cancer without letting them see how afraid you are. The after is quieter, colder, clearer. It is what remains when betrayal burns away every soft illusion and leaves only the truth standing. For 2 years, my life revolved around my mother's illness. Not in the sentimental way people summarize these things afterward. It was alarms in my chest every time my phone rang during work. It was learning how to smile in oncology waiting rooms. It was memorizing lab numbers I never wanted to understand. It was fear turned into routine. My mother, Eleanor, was 65 when the doctors confirmed stage 4 ovarian cancer. My father had already been gone, 5 years by then. A sudden stroke. One ordinary morning, then no ordinary mornings after that. He left behind a modest life insurance policy, and I took every cent of it, added a painful amount of my own savings, and opened what my mother and I called the Lifeline Fund. That was the name we gave it because it felt less terrifying than calling it what it really was. A war chest, a backup future, a place where we put our fear and tried to turn it into time. By the time it was fully built, there was a little over $150,000 in that account. It was not vacation money, not house money, not some romantic someday fund for me and the man I thought I was building a life with. It was sacred money, untouchable, reserved for anything insurance wouldn't fully cover: experimental treatment, private nursing help, emergency travel for specialists, maintenance medication, recurrence plans, all the invisible costs of trying to keep someone alive. And for 4 years, my boyfriend Ryan knew that. He knew because he had lived beside me through all of it. He had held coffee cups for me in hospital hallways, sat beside me during long drives home after bad scans, rubbed circles into my back when I couldn't sleep, and whispered, "We'll get through it," like those words could hold the walls up around my life. I believed him. That part still embarrasses me more than I can explain. It is one thing to be deceived by someone cruel from the beginning. It is another to realize you handed your trust, piece by piece, to someone who learned how to perform tenderness well enough to be mistaken for love. Ryan lived with me. We shared bills, routines, and 1,000 ordinary domestic moments that looked exactly like a future. He knew my mother's medication schedule better than some relatives. He brought her soup, fixed things around her house, kissed my forehead in waiting rooms. When my workload at the engineering firm became impossible and I was constantly being pulled into late meetings, I gave him a debit card tied to the Lifeline Fund. Only for emergencies. Only if something came up with Mom's care while I couldn't get away. That card wasn't just financial access. It was trust made physical. Last Tuesday was the best day of my life. Even now, that sentence feels unreal sitting beside everything that came after it. We were in my mother's oncologist's office for her latest scan results. By then, I knew every variation of the doctor's careful face, the measured voice, the qualified hope, the practiced caution that always came before phrases like, "We need to monitor," or "There's still concern." But that day he walked in smiling. Actually smiling. I remember the exact way my mother looked up at him. The pause. The way I stopped breathing before he had even spoken, because some primitive part of me knew the room had changed. "Eleanor," he said, warm and almost disbelieving himself, "I don't know how else to say it. The tumors are gone. Your markers are non-existent. You're in complete remission." For a second, neither of us moved. Then my mother made this small, broken sound, and I was crying before I even realized tears had started. We held each other and sobbed in that office like two people who had been underwater for years and had finally been allowed one full breath. Relief that deep is painful. It shakes through your whole body because you've been carrying terror for so long you don't know how to set it down gently. Remission wasn't a fairy tale ending. We both knew that. There would still be follow-ups, scans, medication, years of vigilance, the quiet dread of recurrence sitting in every future season. But there was a future. That was everything. On the drive home, I was almost dizzy with gratitude. I stopped for champagne even though my mother would only drink half a glass. I bought her favorite pastries from the little bakery on Maple because she always said they tasted like celebrations. I remember thinking Ryan was going to cry when I told him. I thought he'd grab me, laugh, maybe even spin me around in the kitchen like people do in movies when good news finally wins. I walked into the apartment carrying pastry boxes in one hand and the champagne in the other. "Ryan," I called out, breathless and smiling. You're not going to believe this. She's in remission, complete remission. He was in the kitchen, and the first thing that hit me was not happiness. It was wrongness. He turned too slowly. His face had no joy in it, no relief, no disbelief, nothing bright. All of the color had drained out of him so fast he looked sick, cornered, like a man who had just heard a sound behind him in the dark and knew running would do no good. My smile disappeared before I could stop it. The champagne felt suddenly heavy in my hand. "What is it?" I asked. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. I set the pastry boxes down on the counter with too much care, the way you handle something breakable when you're trying not to let your own hands shake. "Ryan," I said, quieter now, "what's wrong?" He wouldn't look at me. He kept staring at the floor tiles, twisting his fingers together so tightly the knuckles went pale. And in that instant, before he confessed a single thing, something cold moved through me. Not understanding. Not yet, but recognition. "About the fund," he said. Every sound in the room seemed to disappear. "What about the fund?" He swallowed hard. Then it all came out in fragments, as if making it messy would somehow make it smaller. He had started a business, an online brand, a boutique, something he kept calling an opportunity, as if the word itself could make him sound ambitious instead of monstrous. He needed startup capital, inventory, design work, marketing, site development. So he used the fund. At first, just a little, he said. Then more, and then all of it. For a moment, I genuinely thought I had misheard him. "All of it?" I repeated. He finally looked at me then, and what I saw in his face almost made it worse. Not remorse, not horror, self-pity. "I was going to pay it back," he said quickly. "Clara, I was going to surprise you. I thought if I could make it successful fast enough, we'd be okay. We'd be more than okay." I stared at him. There are moments when pain is so large it doesn't enter you all at once. It stands at the edge of your mind like weather, and your body starts reacting before your thoughts can form language around what's happening. I put one hand on his counter to steady myself. He kept talking. That was the sick part. He kept talking like explanation might save him. "The doctors kept saying the prognosis was bad," he said. "Every update was worse. They said maybe 6 months, maybe a year, and I thought..." He stopped. I think some part of him knew there were sentences that, once spoken aloud, could never be walked back. "Say it," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine anymore. He flinched. "I thought she was dying anyway," he whispered. "I thought, if that was where things were headed, maybe I could turn something good out of it. For us, for our future." The world did not shatter the way people describe it in stories. It did something worse. It became perfectly still. He had not stolen from me because he was desperate. He had not panicked. He had not made one terrible decision in a moment of weakness. He had looked at my mother's suffering, at her pain, her fear, her shrinking odds, the woman who welcomed him into holidays and family dinners and hugged him like he belonged there, and translated all of that into timing. He had watched her dying and thought, there may be something usable in this. I looked at the man I had loved for 4 years and felt every last thread of affection inside me burn through at once. Then something in me went cold, not numb. Clear. "Actually, Ryan," I said, and my voice was so calm it made his eyes widen. "She's in remission." He blinked at me. "What?" "She's in remission," I repeated. "Complete remission." For 1 second, confusion crossed his face. Then understanding. Then fear. Real fear. And standing there in the kitchen with unopened champagne on the counter and celebration collapsing all around me, I understood with absolute certainty that I was no longer looking at a broken relationship. I was looking at a crime. The strange thing about that moment wasn't the anger. It was the absence of it. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I didn't even step toward him. The part of me that would have demanded explanations or begged for something that resembled remorse was gone. What replaced it was clarity. Ryan took a step forward like he was about to fix this with words. "Clara, wait. This isn't what it looks like." "It looks exactly like what it is," I said. My voice cut through the room so cleanly it surprised even me. He stopped. I straightened slowly, removing my hand from the counter. The champagne bottle sat between us like a prop from a different life. "You didn't just spend money," I continued. "You need to understand that because right now you still think this is about us, about a mistake, about something we can talk through." "It is about us," he insisted, desperation creeping in. "I did it for us, for our future." "No," I said sharply. "You did it because you calculated that my mother was dying, and you decided that made her money available." He flinched. "Remission isn't the end," I said. "It's the beginning of 5 more years of monitoring. Do you know how much a PET scan costs? $5,000. Every few months. The maintenance medication? $10,000 a month in some cases. And that's if nothing comes back. His breathing changed, faster now, uneven. That fund, I went on, was never about her dying comfortably. It was about her surviving, about giving her a chance if things got worse again. I took a step back from him. You didn't just spend money, Ryan, I said quietly. You stole her chances. The silence that followed was unbearable because it was final. He shook his head, running a hand through his hair like he could scramble reality into something softer. We can fix this, he said quickly. The business, it's already up. It just needs time. I can make it back. I swear to you, I can make it back. I stared at him. There was something almost surreal about the way he still thought in terms of profit and recovery, like this was a bad investment instead of a moral collapse. You think time is something we can gamble with, I said. That's the part you still don't understand. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. That's when his fear sharpened. What are you doing? He asked, his voice dropping. I unlocked the screen slowly. My mother is a 65-year-old cancer patient, I said. You were in a position of trust. You had access to her emergency fund because I believed you were part of this family. Clara, you systematically drained over $150,000, I continued, my voice calm and flat. Not in one moment, not by accident. Over months, while sitting beside me in hospital waiting rooms. His face went pale. You assumed she would die, I said, and you used that assumption to justify stealing from her. Please, he said, stepping closer now, panic bleeding through. Don't do this. We can handle it ourselves. We don't need to. This isn't something we handle, I said. I tapped the screen and brought up the number. This is something the law handles. The color drained completely from his face. You can't, he whispered. Clara, please. It was a mistake. I got in over my head. I didn't think. Exactly, I said. You didn't. I pressed the call button. The line rang once, twice. He stood frozen, watching me like he was seeing me for the first time. When the operator answered, my voice was steady. I need to report suspected financial elder abuse involving my mother's treatment fund, I said. I can provide account access, the timeline, and supporting records. Ryan made a strangled sound in the back of his throat. I turned away from him as I spoke, giving the necessary details with clinical precision. Address, relationship, access point, estimated loss. When I ended the call, the room felt different, quieter, irreversible. He was still standing there, staring at me like the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. You just destroyed my life, he said hoarsely. I shook my head. No, I replied. You did that yourself. I walked past him toward the door and opened it. Leave your keys, I said. He didn't move. And your phone, it's on my family plan. Clara, now! Something in my tone reached him. Whatever argument he was about to make died in his throat. Slowly, like someone moving underwater, he reached into his pocket and placed his keys on the counter. Then his phone. His hands were shaking. For a moment, he just stood there, like he was waiting for me to break, to take it back, to say something soft and forgiving. I didn't. Finally, he grabbed his jacket and walked past me, his shoulder brushing the edge of mine, but not quite touching. The door closed behind him with a quiet click. And just like that, 4 years of my life ended without a single raised voice. I stood there for a long time after he left. The champagne was still on the counter, the pastries were still unopened, the air still smelled faintly sweet from the bakery boxes. It should have been a celebration. Instead, it felt like a crime scene. The police arrived within the hour. 2 officers, calm, professional, efficient. They asked me to walk them through everything from the beginning. I did. I explained the Lifeline Fund, its purpose, how Ryan had access, and what he had confessed. I expected to feel something while I spoke. Anger, grief, anything. But I didn't. It was like I had stepped outside of myself and was watching someone else tell the story. One of the officers exchanged a glance with the other when I explained the context, the cancer, the fund, the assumption behind the theft. It was subtle, but I saw it. Disgust. Not at me. At him. Before they left, they handed me a card. Financial Crimes Unit will follow up, one of them said. You'll likely be contacted by a detective, and because of your mother's condition, Adult Protective Services may get involved as well. I nodded. Thank you. When the door closed again, the apartment fell back into silence. But this time it wasn't the same silence. This one had weight. The next morning, reality became numbers. I sat at my desk with my laptop open and pulled up the account. I don't know what I expected to see. Maybe a single massive withdrawal, something obvious. Instead, it was worse. It was methodical. The first transaction had happened 8 months ago. $10,000. Labeled as inventory. Then $5,000. Web design. $7,500. Marketing. Another 10. Another 15. On and on. A slow bleed. I stared at the screen, scrolling through line after line of transactions, each one a quiet act of betrayal that I had lived through without seeing. Dates jumped out at me, not because they were random, but because they weren't. Every time my mother's condition had worsened, every time a scan came back uncertain, every time we had sat in that office bracing for bad news, there was a withdrawal. He hadn't just taken money, he had timed it, used fear as cover, used uncertainty as opportunity. I closed my eyes for a second, pressing my fingers against my temples. Then I kept going, because that's what this was now. Work. I found the business name eventually. A clean, meaningless brand. An online boutique selling overpriced, forgettable pieces of jewelry that looked like they had been copied from a dozen other sites. There was nothing special about it, nothing worth what it had cost. I accessed the shared cloud account we had used for bills and documents. His emails were still there. Invoices, receipts, contracts with designers and marketing freelancers. Every single dollar mapped out in digital paper trails. I printed everything, page after page, organizing it into sections. Dates, transfers, corresponding invoices. By the time I was done, I had a binder thick enough to feel like evidence, because that's exactly what it was. When the detective called later that afternoon, I was ready. "My name is Detective Miller," he said, his voice tired but focused. "I'm following up on your report." "I have everything you need," I replied, and I meant it, because whatever this had started as, love, partnership, a shared future, it had become something else entirely. Something structured, something documented, something that would not disappear just because he wished it would. By the time I hung up, one thing was clear. The before was gone, completely, and the after had begun. Telling my mother was the only part I hadn't prepared for. I had the documents, I had the timeline, I had the law on my side. But I didn't have a script for breaking her heart. Her house looked exactly the same as it always did. Sunlight filtering through the thin curtains, the faint smell of tea lingering in the air, a blanket folded neatly over the arm of her chair. It was a place that still believed in normalcy, in quiet routines, in the illusion that life, after everything, might finally be settling again. She was sitting by the window when I walked in, reading, or at least pretending to. She looked up the moment she heard me, her face softening into that familiar, steady smile. "There you are," she said gently. "I was just thinking about you." My throat tightened. For a second, I almost didn't say anything. Almost let her keep that moment. That fragile version of reality where remission meant relief and not the beginning of something darker. But that version didn't exist anymore. I sat down across from her, and I told her everything. Not all at once. I couldn't. The words came slowly, carefully, like I was placing something heavy between us, piece by piece. The fund, Ryan's access, the business, the withdrawals. By the time I reached the end, I couldn't bring myself to look at her. I was waiting for it. The shock, the anger, the devastation. The kind of reaction that would match what had been taken from her. But what came instead was worse. Silence. Soft, deep, heavy. Then I felt her hand close over mine. Warm, steady. "Clara," she said quietly. I looked up. There were no tears in her eyes, no rage, just sorrow. Not for herself. For him. "That poor boy," she whispered. I blinked at her, stunned. "He knew better," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "He knew exactly what that money was for." "I know," she said gently. "And he still—" "I know," she repeated, squeezing my hand lightly. I swallowed hard, trying to steady the surge of emotion rising in my chest. "I thought you'd be angry," I admitted. She gave me a small, sad smile. "Oh, sweetheart, anger is easy," she said. "It burns fast and leaves nothing behind." Her gaze drifted toward the window for a moment, the sunlight catching the fine lines in her face, the marks of everything she had endured and survived. "I'm not sad about the money," she said softly. "We'll figure that out. We always do." My chest tightened. "I'm sad for you," she continued, "because you trusted him." Her eyes came back to mine. "And I'm sad for him, because something inside him is so empty that he could look at suffering and think of profit." The words settled between us. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. Up until then, everything had been driven by shock, by instinct, by that cold clarity that had taken over the night before. But sitting there with her hand in mine, listening to her speak with that kind of quiet grace, I understood something deeper. This wasn't just about justice. It was about honoring her. The way she had faced fear without bitterness. The way she had carried pain without letting it turn her cruel. Ryan hadn't just stolen money. He had violated something sacred, and I wasn't going to let that be reduced to a mistake. He was arrested 3 days later. Detective Miller called me in the morning. "We picked him up at his sister's place, PM," he said. He seemed surprised. That almost made me laugh. Surprised. as if consequences were something that happened to other people, as if the world would simply absorb what he had done and move on. What happens now? I asked. Processing, formal charges, then we move forward, he said. You may be contacted again for additional statements. I understand. After I hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at nothing. It wasn't satisfaction, it wasn't relief. If anything, it felt quiet, like something had been set into motion that no longer needed me to push it forward. The calls started that afternoon. I didn't answer the first one, or the second. By the third, I recognized the number. His mother. I let it ring once more before picking up. What did you do? She demanded immediately, her voice sharp with panic and anger. Ryan just called me. They arrested him. What is going on? I closed my eyes briefly, steadying myself. He stole over $150,000 from a medical fund meant for my mother's cancer treatment, I said calmly. I reported it. There was a pause. Then, you're destroying his life over money? She snapped. He made a mistake. He got in over his head. Your son didn't make a mistake, I interrupted, my voice still even. He made a series of calculated decisions over 8 months. He was trying to build something, she shot back. He was thinking about the future. He was thinking about profit, I said, based on the assumption that my mother was going to die. Silence. Sharp. Sudden. Then she scoffed. Oh, please, don't twist this into something it's not. You two were together. You shared things. That account. He had access. That makes it complicated. No, I said quietly. It doesn't. He loved you, she insisted. He wouldn't hurt you on purpose. I let out a slow breath. This was never about me, I said. She didn't respond. He didn't just hurt me, I continued. He exploited a sick, vulnerable woman who trusted him. Her tone hardened. You're overreacting. I almost smiled at that. Not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. Your son gambled with my mother's life, I said, my voice calm but final. The fact that you can call that an overreaction tells me everything I need to know. He doesn't deserve this, she said. He earned this, I replied. And before she could say another word, I ended the call. More messages followed. Texts, voicemails, different numbers. Same arguments. Mistake, overreaction, ruined life. I didn't respond to any of them, because there was nothing left to explain. That night, I asked my mother to stay with me instead of being alone. Later, I walked into the kitchen and finally opened the champagne. The soft pop echoed in the quiet apartment. I poured a glass, then another. When I came back to the living room, my mother was wrapped in her blanket, watching something absent-mindedly on TV. I handed her the glass. She looked up at me, a faint smile touching her lips. For remission, I said. She raised her glass slightly. For the future, she replied. We clinked them together gently. And for the first time since everything had unraveled, I felt something close to peace. Not because things were fixed, not because anything had been restored, but because the truth was no longer hidden, and whatever came next would be built on that. The system didn't move fast, but it moved with weight. That was the first thing I learned. After the arrest, everything shifted from shock and reaction into structure. Timelines, filings, appointments, names of people whose job it was to take something deeply personal and translate it into something legally undeniable. A week after Ryan's arrest, my mother and I sat across from the prosecutor. Her name was Ms. Chen. Sharp eyes, calm voice, the kind of presence that didn't need to raise its tone to control a room. She didn't waste time. What happened here, she said, folding her hands neatly on the table, is not a relationship dispute. Her gaze moved between me and my mother. It's a criminal case, and more importantly, it's a case involving a vulnerable victim. My mother shifted slightly beside me, but her expression stayed composed. Ms. Chen continued. Your boyfriend, Ryan Hayes, has been formally charged with 2 felonies, she said. Grand theft and financial elder abuse. The second charge hung heavier in the air. Even hearing it spoken out loud made something inside me tighten. Because of your mother's age and medical condition, Ms. Chen added, the law recognizes her as a protected individual. That elevates the severity of what he did. I nodded slowly. I understand. She studied me for a moment. You should also understand this, she said. Cases like this don't hinge on emotion. They hinge on proof. I have proof, I replied. A faint, approving nod. I've reviewed what you submitted, she said, and I agree. She reached for a file and slid a few documents forward. The defense is already building their strategy, she continued. They're going to try to reframe this as a domestic dispute, a failed investment, a misunderstanding between partners. I let out a quiet breath. Of course they were. They'll argue that he had access to the account, she went on, that you implicitly allowed him to use the funds, that this was something agreed upon, and that you're now retaliating after the relationship ended. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so disconnected from reality. That's not going to hold, I said. No, Ms. Chen agreed calmly. It won't. She flipped open the file. Because intent matters, she said. And in your case, intent is documented. She tapped the page. Messages between you and Ryan clearly establish the purpose of that account. Repeatedly. You refer to it as your mother's treatment fund. You discuss specific medical expenses. You emphasize that it's reserved for her care. She looked up at me. That removes ambiguity. Then she turned another page. And then there's the timeline. I didn't fully understand what she meant until the preliminary hearing. They had built it into a chart, a simple, brutal comparison. On one side, my mother's medical updates, dates, scan results, doctor's notes, words like progression, uncertain, concerning growth. On the other side, Ryan's withdrawals, 10,000, 5,000, 15,000, 7,500. Each one aligned with the moment when my mother's condition had worsened. Each one a decision made in the shadow of fear. I sat there staring at it, my hands folded tightly in my lap. It wasn't just evidence. It was a pattern. A logic. A method. He hadn't been desperate. He had been strategic. Ms. Chen's voice cut through the room, calm and precise as she addressed the judge. The defendant did not act impulsively, she said. He acted opportunistically. He increased his withdrawals in direct correlation with the perceived decline of the victim's health. A pause. He was not reacting to circumstances. He was leveraging them. I felt something shift in the room. Not dramatically, not loudly, but enough. The weight of it had landed. Ryan's lawyer tried anyway. A public defender. Tired, overworked, and clearly reaching for something that wasn't there. This is a relationship matter, he argued. A dispute between two individuals who shared finances. My client believed he had permission to use the funds as an investment. Ms. Chen didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Then where is the agreement? She asked. Silence. Where is the documentation? The messages confirming consent? The business plan presented and approved? More silence. The lawyer shifted. My client has access, Ms. Chen cut in. Access does not equal ownership. Access does not override documented intent. And access certainly does not permit the exploitation of funds designated for a vulnerable third party. The words landed cleanly. Final. I didn't look at Ryan during that exchange. I didn't need to. I could feel it. The unraveling. After the hearing, Ms. Chen pulled us aside. They've been offered a plea deal, she said. My stomach tightened slightly. What kind? I asked. 4 years, she replied, if he pleads guilty to both charges. I let that sit for a moment. 4 years. For everything he had done, for everything he had taken, for the risk he had forced onto my mother's life. And? She gave a small knowing look. He refused. Of course he did. He believes he can win, she added, or at least reduce the charges. I shook my head slowly. He still doesn't understand, I said. No, she agreed quietly. He doesn't. The days leading up to the trial were strangely calm. Not peaceful, not easy, but settled, like the storm had already passed, and what remained was the aftermath. I spent most of my time working, rebuilding, not just financially, but mentally. My mother handled it better than anyone had a right to. She went to her follow-up appointments, took her medication, sat in the sun with her tea, like the world hadn't just tried to take something from her. Sometimes I would watch her and wonder how she managed it, how she carried so much without letting it turn into bitterness. I don't want to spend whatever time I have left being angry, she told me once, as if reading my thoughts. You have more than time, I said quietly. She smiled. I have today, she replied. The night before the trial, I didn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew something was ending. Not just the case, not just the relationship, but that entire version of my life. The one where trust came easily. The one where love didn't need to be questioned. That version was gone, and whatever came after would be built differently, stronger, colder, clearer. The next morning, I stood outside the courthouse with my mother beside me. The air was cool, still. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she reached for my hand. I'm proud of you, she said softly. I looked at her. For what? For not looking away, she replied. I swallowed, tightening my grip on her hand. Then we walked inside. And just like that, it was no longer about what he had done. It was about what would happen next. The trial lasted 3 days. Only 3. It felt like a lifetime. Courtrooms don't look the way they do in movies. There's no dramatic lighting, no swelling music, no sense of spectacle. Everything is quieter than you expect. Controlled. Measured. The kind of environment where every word matters more because nothing else does. The first day was procedure. Opening statements. Framing. Positioning. Ryan sat at the defense table in a suit I had never seen before. Dark, plain, something chosen to make him look smaller, less threatening, less intentional. For a brief second, when I first saw him, my mind tried to connect that man to the person I had once loved. It failed. There was nothing left to connect. He didn't look at me. Not once. Ms. Chen stood when it was her turn to speak. She didn't pace, didn't dramatize. She simply spoke. "This case," she said, her voice steady, "is about trust, vulnerability, and calculated exploitation." She paused, letting the words settle. The defendant was not a stranger. He was not an outsider, forcing his way into a victim's life. He was invited in, welcomed, trusted. Her gaze moved briefly toward me, then toward my mother. He used that trust not to protect, but to take. No embellishment, no exaggeration, just truth. Ryan's lawyer followed. He leaned heavily on tone rather than substance. "This is not a crime," he said. "This is a relationship that deteriorated, a misunderstanding, a financial disagreement between two people who shared their lives and their resources." I felt my jaw tighten. A misunderstanding. That was the word they had chosen. As if $150,000 could vanish accidentally. As if intent could be blurred just by calling it complicated. I didn't react. Because I knew what was coming next. My mother testified on the second day. I thought I was prepared for it. I wasn't. She walked to the stand slowly, carefully. Not because she was weak, but because her body still carried the memory of everything it had been through. But when she sat down, there was nothing fragile about her. They asked her simple questions first. Her name, her age, her diagnosis. She answered each one calmly. Then they asked about Ryan. Her expression softened for just a moment. "He was like family," she said. The courtroom was still. "He spent holidays with us, helped around the house. He knew about my condition. He knew what we were facing." Her voice didn't break. That was the hardest part. It stayed steady. "He knew what that money meant," she added quietly. Ms. Chen stepped forward slightly. "Did you ever give him permission to use those funds for his business?" she asked. "No," my mother said. No hesitation, no doubt, just truth. Then came the part I hadn't expected. "How did his actions affect you?" Ms. Chen asked gently. There was a pause. Not long, just enough. "It didn't make me feel angry," my mother said. I felt my chest tighten. "It made me feel sad," she continued. "Because when someone can look at suffering and see opportunity, it means they've already lost something inside themselves." A murmur moved through the room. She didn't look at Ryan. Not once. And somehow that said more than anything else could have. When it was my turn, I kept it simple. Facts. Timeline. No emotion. Or at least none that I let show. I described the Lifeline Fund. Its purpose. The remission day. Walking into the apartment. His face. His confession. Ms. Chen nodded slightly as I spoke, guiding the rhythm without interrupting it. Then she asked the one question I knew was coming. "What exactly did the defendant say to you when explaining why he used the funds?" The room felt smaller, quieter. I took a breath. "He said," I began, my voice steady, "that he thought my mother was dying anyway." The words hung there, heavy, unavoidable. I saw it then. A shift in the jury, subtle but real. Ryan's lawyer stood for cross-examination. He tried to soften everything, to blur edges. "To clarify," he said, "your boyfriend was under significant emotional stress at the time, correct?" "I was too," I replied. He hesitated. "But he may have believed, incorrectly, that the funds could be used more flexibly?" "No," I said, "because he had access." "Access is not permission," I cut in, my tone still calm. He shifted tactics. "You ended the relationship immediately after this conversation?" "Yes." "And reported him shortly after?" "Yes." "So it's possible," he pressed, "that your emotional state influenced your decision to escalate this matter legally?" I met his gaze. "No," I said. "The crime did that." Silence. He sat down. Ryan testified on the third day. That was where everything fell apart. He walked to the stand with the same confidence I remembered from before, the same belief that he could explain his way out of anything. At first, it almost worked. He spoke about ambition, about wanting to build something, about pressure, about love. Always circling back to love, like the word itself might protect him. "I wasn't trying to hurt anyone," he said. "I thought I could fix it. I thought I could make it better." Ms. Chen stood slowly, and then she began. "Let's talk about timing," she said. She walked him through the withdrawals, one by one, date by date, amount by amount. "On this date," she said, pointing to the chart, "your partner's mother received a worsening prognosis. That same day, you transferred $10,000. Why?" He hesitated. "I needed inventory." And on this date, she continued, not missing a beat, another negative report, another withdrawal. $7,500. Marketing. Why? His answers started to fracture. They were business expenses. And this one? She pressed. 15,000, 2 days after a critical scan. He swallowed. I was trying to grow the business. You were accelerating spending, she said calmly, every time her condition worsened. No. Yes, she said, cutting through him, because you believed time was limited. The room went still. He opened his mouth, closed it. For the first time, he had nothing. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. I sat beside my mother, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, staring at the floor. Not thinking, not hoping, just waiting. When they came back in, the room shifted again. That same quiet tension, but this time it felt final. On the charge of grand theft, the foreperson said, we find the defendant guilty. A breath caught somewhere behind me. On the charge of financial elder abuse, guilty. No hesitation, no doubt, just certainty. I didn't look at Ryan. I didn't need to, because in that moment, it was over. Not emotionally. Not completely, but legally. And that mattered. The sentencing was 2 weeks later. 2 quiet, heavy weeks, where everything felt suspended, like the world was holding its breath before deciding how hard it would exhale. I went back to work, answered emails, sat through meetings, spoke when I had to. But everything felt slightly distant, like I was moving through a version of my life that hadn't fully caught up to what had already happened. At home, things were different, simpler, quieter. My mother settled back into her routines. Tea in the morning, short walks when she felt strong enough, checkups that we approached now with cautious optimism instead of dread. Remission. The word still felt fragile. But it was real, and that was enough. The courtroom was fuller on the day of sentencing. Not crowded, but heavier. Ryan's family sat behind him. I recognized his mother immediately. She looked smaller than I remembered, less certain, like the past weeks had finally forced reality into a shape she couldn't argue with anymore. Ryan stood at the defense table. He looked different. Not broken, not remorseful, just hollow. Like whatever version of himself had believed he could talk his way out of this had finally gone quiet. The judge entered. Everyone stood, then sat, and the room stilled. He was older, measured, the kind of man who didn't rush anything, not his words, not his decisions. He looked down at the file in front of him for a long moment before speaking. Mr. Hayes, he began. Ryan lifted his head slightly. In my years on this bench, the judge continued, his voice calm but carrying, I have seen many kinds of theft. A pause, some born of desperation, some of addiction, some of greed. He looked up. But this is different. The silence in the room deepened. You did not take money in a moment of panic, he went on. You did not act under immediate pressure or threat. You acted over time, repeatedly, deliberately. Each word landed with weight. You were trusted, welcomed into a family facing extraordinary hardship, given access not as a convenience, but as an act of faith. Ryan's hands tightened slightly at his sides. And you used that access to convert another person's suffering into opportunity. A faint sound moved through the courtroom. Not loud, just enough to be felt. You looked at the decline of a vulnerable individual and treated it as a timeline, a window, a calculation. He paused again. And when he spoke next, his voice carried something colder. That is not a mistake, he said. That is a predatory act. Ryan didn't move, didn't react, just stood there staring forward. The judge glanced down briefly, then back up. For the charge of grand theft, you are sentenced to 5 years. A sharp inhale from somewhere behind. For the charge of financial elder abuse, another pause. 10 years. The words seemed to echo, to be served concurrently. There it was. Final, unavoidable. 10 years. Ryan blinked slowly, like his mind was trying, and failing, to process what had just been said. Behind him, his mother let out a soft, broken sound. But he didn't turn, didn't look back. He just stood there, still, empty. I didn't feel anything in that moment. No satisfaction, no relief, no sense of victory. Just quiet. Like a door had closed somewhere deep inside me, and I could finally stop holding it open. I stood as instructed when the judge finished, sat when told, moved when it was time. And then it was over. Outside the courthouse, the air felt different, lighter, not because anything had been restored, but because something had been resolved. My mother slipped her arm through mine as we walked down the steps. Neither of us spoke for a while. We didn't need to. Finally, she exhaled softly. It's done, she said. I nodded. Yes. We reached the sidewalk and paused. Cars passed. People moved. Life, indifferent and continuous, carried on around us. There's no joy in this, I said quietly. I know, she replied. I looked at her. But there's something. She smiled faintly. Peace, she said. I let that word settle. Peace. Not happiness, not neat closure, but enough. It's been almost a year now. Ryan is in a state correctional facility. His business failed within months. Whatever money remained in its accounts was seized, redirected, reduced to a fraction of what was taken. We never recovered most of it, but that stopped mattering in the way it used to. I've been working more, saving again, slowly rebuilding the Lifeline Fund piece by piece. Friends helped, family stepped in, not in dramatic ways, just steady ones, the kind that hold. My mother is still in remission. Her checkups are good. Her strength is returning. Some days, when the light hits just right and she's laughing at something small, it almost feels like we've stepped into a version of life we weren't sure we would get to have. And that is the only victory that counts. People still ask me sometimes if I regret it, if I should have handled it differently, privately, quietly, if I went too far. My answer never changes. What Ryan did wasn't a relationship mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't something that could be talked through or forgiven away. It was a crime, a serious one, against someone who trusted him, someone who didn't have the luxury of being protected by anything except the people around her. I didn't ruin his life. I didn't sentence him. I didn't decide his future. I reported what he did. And the system for once did exactly what it was supposed to do. He wasn't punished because I wanted revenge. He was punished because of his choices, because of his actions, because of what he decided to do when he thought no one would stop him. 10 years. Not because I said so, but because that's what it cost. And as for me, I'm still here, still building, still choosing every day to move forward without carrying what he did any further than I already have. Because some things don't need to be carried forever. Some things just need to be finished.